That movie sucked.
I kind of liked it.
Movie Night Crew Network.
Hello and welcome to Content and Capable, where I try to figure out what it really means to adult. Today I spoke to Ben and Brienne of Typically Diverse and RSVPod about their move away from their support system in Europe all the way to Australia and the interesting experiences they've had since moving. Welcome to Content and Capable, Brienne and Ben. It's nice to have you guys here.
It's nice to be here.
Thank you.
Yeah. The question that we always start with is, what's some adulting that you've recently been doing?
I'm pregnant. That's the extent of my adulting.
Look, my mother just gave birth as of recording about 3 or 4 weeks ago. So I definitely feel that like pregnancy is just like a whole job in and of itself.
Yeah. That's my escape. I'm pregnant. That's my adulting. Can pass the question on to Ben.
Good question. I don't know. I used a tire inflator for the first time today.
Yeah, true.
Other than that, I don't know.
Wow, yeah, no. Centrelink has asked me to report my income. So I just spent the last 10 minutes reporting my income and my working hours so I can continue getting my youth allowance. It's something very privileged for me to say, but at the same time, I realize that if I don't do it, they'll just cut me off of it very easily.
Yeah.
Well, we might start all the way at the beginning. What a perfect way to start. How did you guys meet each other?
Ooh, that's a fun question. Do you want me to take it?
Yeah.
So we actually met. Initially, we were 10 when we first met.
Yeah.
But we became friends when we were about 13 in secondary school, high school, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And we were part of the same group of friends, and we became really good friends at 13. And then we started, we kind of dated at 14 for 2 weeks, but when you're 14, you don't really date. But we dated properly as of 16, and that was almost 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Wow. And so, if listeners aren't aware, you guys are married now, and you've got a child. I was I texted you, I'm like, this would be really easy to schedule when we're in the same time zone. I don't have to do maths. And then you're like, daycare. I'm like, oh, I forgot daycare exists.
Yeah. Yeah, we can record when she's gone.
Yeah. I am the eldest of 10 children. I know what daycare is, but I haven't, it's been about 6 months since the last child went to daycare. Just because we just had a natural gap in the children. Mm-hmm. So they're either at school or they're at home. And when you said that, I was like, oh, that is something that exists and that I have to get but why did you guys decide to move to Australia then?
It was multiple different reasons. We had been talking about leaving mainland Europe for a few years.
Yeah.
Ironically, we were looking at moving to Iceland. Obviously, the plan changed. I think Australia specifically. So I visited with my mom and her husband in 2015. And I just fell in love with Australia. I couldn't believe how beautiful it was and how kind people are here. And I basically came back to Europe and came back home. And I said to you, we're moving to Australia and we just have to figure out how to make this work at this point. And obviously that's not how it ended up going because you had a master's that you wanted to do.
Yeah, I was towards the end of my bachelor's degree at that point. And so I found a good master's in Melbourne that I wanted to do. And so that kind of helped us move. But that also meant there was a lot of organization, getting enrolled in the university and organizing the move with the proper timing for the semester when it starts and all of that. And
another reason we chose Australia was the weather.
Yeah.
You chose the right country, although I don't think you chose the right city, unfortunately. Melbourne is not the nicest when it comes to weather.
It's so much nicer than where we're from.
Where are you guys from?
My gosh. We were both born and you've lived there your whole life.
Yeah.
I've mainly lived there in Brussels, the capital of Belgium.
Yeah.
So Melbourne is much nicer weather than Brussels.
Wow.
But after 2 years, we were ready to.
Yeah, after 2 years, we're like, that's it. We're sick of Melbourne weather. We need to move.
So initially, it was a nice change, but we got used to it a bit too quickly, and then.
But yes, I definitely understand, getting to Melbourne after 2 years. Even so my father is from Alice Springs in the middle of the desert, and he moved to Sydney for university, my mother there, and he's very used to extreme heat and extreme cold, tough as nails. Since living in Queensland for the last 15, 16 years now, he has gotten a little softer. We used to be able to gauge how extreme the cold was by whether Dad was wearing a jumper. And that Dad, one morning would just pop out in a jumper and we're like, it's not that cold, Dad. Are you okay? I suppose it's an age thing as well, though. Yeah. Sometimes I go, he's becoming an old man. So you went to Melbourne for your masters. I'm going to be a very, very much someone who is at university at the moment. What university did you go to study your masters?
Swinburne University of Technology.
Oh, Swinburne. That's nice.
Yeah.
And any reason in particular for that university aside from, I don't know, the other ones?
They had a double masters that was combined engineering and entrepreneurship and innovation. It was pretty much the only university that offered such a degree. And so that's what decided for Swinburne more than any other.
Wow. And so living in Melbourne for 2 years, what was some of the big culture shocks you had from living in Europe and European cultures compared to Australian culture?
Well, I touched on it earlier on, but people in Australia are so nice. And that was what really shocked us. I remember the first time we went into Woolworths or Woolies, and there's a person standing there whose job is to greet you, and they just go, "Hi, how are you today?" And the first time we literally just both stopped and glared at them, because in Brussels you don't say hello to people. You walk into a shop and they go, "What do you want?" And we were just like, why are people so kind?
Yeah.
What is going on? And it took us a few weeks to fully get used to people being genuinely nice, and retail workers genuinely smiling at you and asking about your day, and they want to get to know stuff about you, in a polite way, because where we're from, that just doesn't happen. I think that was the first full proper shock we had, where we were both like, whoa, that is so different to where we grew up.
Yeah.
You also have the milk. That's your big thing, is the milk.
My big thing when we moved was the milk, because in Europe, UHT milk, your long life milk that you just buy in a normal shelf, not in the cold section, that's your normal, your baseline. Everyone buys big packs of long life milk, and that's what you use, and you always put just one bottle in the fridge at a time. But here, the standard is fresh milk that you buy in the fresh section, and for some reason that really marked me.
It really did. You bring up the milk a lot.
It's interesting though, because we do have a strange obsession with milk, and one of the big things I've learnt while being at university is that we do somehow have this weird obsession, and there's this meme that goes around a lot, and it's I want milk that tastes like real milk, and everyone's definition of real milk is very different. So you bring up what brand of milk you buy or what kind of milk you buy, and it's starts arguments left, right, and center.
That's something that didn't throw me off, because I lived in the UK for a few years, and in the UK it's here you have fresh milk, you don't really use long life milk, so I just adapted immediately. But it took you a while, and even now, every so often when we bring up what was the weirdest thing about moving here, you're always the milk. So obviously the milk's really stayed with you.
Yeah.
So obviously it was a big decision to move here to Australia. Did you have support systems when you moved here, family and friends already, or did you just move here and start again?
So I technically have family in Melbourne. It's my mom's cousin, but I'd met her once for 2 days before we moved, so I didn't know her. So we technically had someone to fall back on, but we didn't know them.
Yeah.
You had never met them.
No.
I had met them very quickly. So it was really just a leap in the dark. We really didn't have anyone here waiting for us to help once we moved.
Yeah.
Which was an interesting decision to make in hindsight.
Yeah, and that's extremely brave, because definitely I feel very lucky that I have family and friends pretty much in every capital city here in Australia, which means that, if I decided to move out, I have somewhere to fall back on. But I would be terrified to move somewhere else without any support. And as a single person, let alone as like a couple who, one of them going to study their masters, and like that just seems so stressful.
Yeah.
Did you find it quite easy to like form social groups and form like your own support system here?
Not really, because
Yeah.
so I started working at a dive center, but how the dive center was set up is we didn't really ever interact with each other or like the dive instructors, so I didn't really ever get to know anyone there. And then I started working from home instead because reasons. And you went to university, but everyone lived in town. We lived outside of Melbourne, like we were in the suburbs, so we never really fully made friends there.
Yeah.
You made one real good friend.
Yeah.
That you still talk to now on
Yeah.
a daily basis. But other than that, it was really just relying on each other. And I think it was a huge shift also because we both came from kind of difficult childhoods. And so it was the first time we were both probably going to therapy. And I think that was more our anchor, was we were finally getting the mental health support we needed. And that was more helpful than I think having social groups in that sense.
So, like, that's really interesting because of, at least for me, social groups are a really important way for me to regulate my mental health as well. For example, I just finished first semester of uni. I'm a second year student, but finished my first semester, and it was just hard. It was grueling, and I had to stop everything for a good 2 weeks where I just was like said to no to social events. I just sit down and study, and my mental health fell off a cliff. It went into free fall for a little bit. There was a point where I realized that I was in big trouble, and I needed to sort my mental health out quick. Otherwise things were going to get a lot worse, and I would have to be back on medication that I didn't want to be on. And so to recover, the way I recovered was to go to think social events. So the last 2 nights I've been going out with friends and just enjoying their company, because I haven't been able to do that because I've been so stressed about other things. But it's interesting you said that by having that distance and being able to work on your mental health with therapy, you didn't feel the huge need to have a social group.
I didn't know. And we got a puppy pretty much immediately when we moved. That was bad timing. It's just how things ended up going with finally getting a house and everything. And I think that really helped also because I've had dogs my whole life growing up, and I was desperate to get a dog for years again. And you've never had pets.
Yeah.
And so I think that was a huge shift also, just getting used to having a pet. And we did go out. Was it twice a month we went out on dog walking groups?
Yeah.
So we did see people, we weren't just at home by ourselves all the time, but we never properly made friends with any of these people. We would just see them on the walks and that'd be it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, and I think that for some people that's great. That's perfectly fine. And for others, I don't know. For me, I always look for something deeper, and it is a reference to my childhood where I didn't have many really great friendships. So then you were living in Melbourne at the time. What made you decide to move up to Townsville? Because that's very out of the way.
The weather.
Yeah, the weather.
The weather. Okay.
We wanted heat.
Look, that's a valid point in and of itself. I think anything south of Rockhampton is terrible in terms of weather. It was just perfect weather all the time. Didn't need to worry about anything other than the cyclones, but that was fine.
Yeah. That is a worry. Not something we're used to as little European kids. We're not used to wild weather. So the first cyclone warning, we're like, what do we do? What are we meant to do? It was kind of weird.
What are some of the other things that you guys have really noticed in terms of changes in the weather and the environment here in Australia as compared to Europe?
Again, I think it's more of a change for you because I've traveled a lot and I've lived all over and I've lived in the tropics before, but I think the big thing that you've brought up is every day is the same. Every day you wake up and you can put on a t-shirt and shorts and you're good to go. Whereas
Yeah.
in like Brussels, one day can be 25 and the next day can be 10 degrees. And
Yeah.
you don't know, and you have to check the weather before you get dressed. Otherwise, you're going to dress wrong systematically. Whereas here,
Yeah.
like, you know, in the summer, it's hot. And in the winter, it's not as hot.
Yeah.
And that's it. And I think that was the biggest, like, weather thing was it's more predictable and it's just the same. And then there's also not the fact that, because again, in Brussels, the winter, it'll rain, like that really crappy drizzle
Yeah.
that gets you wet, but not enough that you consider that you're like wet from rain, but you're wet enough that it's annoying. And it does
Yeah.
that for like 3 months non-stop over the winter. And it's so depressing and it's horrible. And obviously we don't have that here. We live in the tropics. So when it rains here, it'll like downpour for 20 minutes and then it's gone.
Yeah.
And I think that was a big difference also.
Yeah.
Again, more so for you having
Yeah.
not lived in the tropics. That there's never these moments where like it's gonna rain for like 2 weeks without a break.
Yeah. No, that's for sure. The fact that like I can check my weather app and the weather for the next 10 days is pretty much exactly the same every single day. And yeah, you
Yeah.
get to a point where you can just, like, without checking the weather, you know how you have to dress. Well, in Belgium and even in Melbourne, you have to check the weather because it can change from one day to the next, or even within the same day. You can be really warm and then all of a sudden it's cold and rainy.
It was like that time we went for the walk at the beach.
Yeah.
It was a really, really hot day in Melbourne, and we decided let's take the dog to the beach and go for a walk. And so we park kind of at one end of the beach and walk all the way up to the other end. And once we get there, I'm petitioning for us to stop and get like ice cream or something because it was so hot. And you kept saying, no, I don't want to, I just want to go home.
Because I was too hot. I just wanted to
You
get
just
back to
wanted
the
to
car
get-
and go home.
And so we kind of had a moment where we were like, should we stop? Should we not? And so I decided, let's just go home. The dog's getting too hot. And we start walking home. And it's probably, a half-hour walk to the car? Within the first, 10 minutes, the weather changed and dropped, 20 degrees and got really windy and cold. And we're like, what just happened? And
Yeah.
so we managed to make it back to the car, freezing. We have an Italian Greyhound who's, really skinny and they're really sensitive to the cold.
Yeah.
And she's shivering and whimpering because she's so cold. And we're like, what just happened? It dropped 19 degrees
Yeah.
in 5 minutes. It was insane. So thankfully we didn't stop for ice cream.
Yeah, we're thankful that we turned around because we were too hot, because in the end we would have been stuck in the cold weather for much longer.
And that was really wild. And that's not the kind of thing we get as extremely in Brussels.
No.
You don't have those crazy extremes
No,
in temperature
yeah.
in 5 minutes. So that
Yes,
was
no.
an experience.
Yeah, weather is wild. I do like how a storm will pass through and it'll be 15 minutes and then the rain's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what I hate after a storm is that it gets muggy and terrible. And you guys would know this, especially in summer. A storm will pass through and then you know it's going to be muggy and terrible for the next, until the night. And it's just hard to breathe and you feel like you can't escape the sweat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've been living in Australia for a few years, and you guys were talking before you guys had started on the path to become Australian citizens. What made you guys decide to do that?
I think it's just easier because we live here and we know we want to live here permanently, and especially now with kids here, it's just easier to be either permanent residents or ideally citizens, because things like Medicare or Centrelink and all that are only available for citizens or permanent residents.
Yeah.
And I think because our plan is to live here permanently, it's just
Yeah.
easier to be real citizens of the country and to be able to benefit from all of these things. And I personally don't have many ties to my home country. I'm a
Yeah.
Belgian citizen and a British citizen. And I'm not particularly tied to either of those citizenships, so I'm happy to let them go for this new country that I have adopted. So I think it just
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, because this is becoming our new home, I think it just makes sense for us to...
Especially with kids. I think if we
Yeah.
didn't have kids, it wouldn't be as big of a deal for us. But now that we've got a toddler and we've got another baby on the way, and I think it's just easier for their sake if they can be citizens.
Yeah, definitely. I see that logic. I've got a couple of friends who are international students or have been international students and have applied and become citizens or becoming permanent residents. And you always take for granted, as someone who has, I've been brought up in this country, take for granted the services you get as a citizen that you don't otherwise get as a foreigner. and I find that it's amazing sometimes, things like Medicare and Centrelink and, all the benefits of being an Australian are just Australian. And I think one of the biggest culture shocks I've had when talking to people from America and from Europe and, even from parts of Asia and South America, is like, that's not equal. You don't have this access to healthcare that, and this casual access to healthcare as well, that, for example, America definitely doesn't have that.
Yeah.
And, Australia and Europe are quite closely aligned when it comes to things like that. But then other things like, I have a French exchange student as a friend, and she and I have been helping each other, and do applications and progress in our careers. And when I'm helping her or when I'm discussing work with her, she goes, I have to be really careful on what jobs I apply for because, most of them you have to be a permanent resident or a citizen. And they don't take in people who don't have that status.
Yeah.
And I understand why. It's very hard on an employer to employ that kind of person because there are extra risks involved and extra problems and hurdles that they have to jump through in terms of legally employing them. But at the same time, I really wish it was the same for everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we definitely feel that, especially I think more so with the pregnancy with Medicare. Because whenever I see my midwife, if I was on Medicare, I'd have my appointment, great, and then I can walk out and I'm done. Because I'm on private insurance, because you have to be on private insurance if you're not on Medicare. Once we're done seeing the midwife, we then have 3 or 4 different forms we have to fill out. Every single appointment we have to fill out these forms about, yes, I understand that I'm not on Medicare. Yes, I'm on private insurance. These are my private insurance details. And yes, I understand I'll get a different money back from my insurer than I would if I was on Medicare. And it's every single appointment. And towards the end of your pregnancy, the last pregnancy, I was seeing my midwife every week.
Yeah.
So every week we then had to fill out these 4 forms systematically, and now we're doing it all over again.
Yeah.
And it's so frustrating. And every time, now the receptionist knows us and she preps the little forms in advance. But before she properly knew us and knew she had to get the forms ready, every time we'd have to go up to the counter and she goes, "Oh no, honey, you don't have to pay. You can just go home." I'm like, "No, I'm on private health insurance. I need to fill out all the payment forms." And she goes, "Oh, well, I don't really know how to do that. Let me find somebody who knows how to do that." And then we're waiting 20 minutes for someone who knows the forms we need to fill in.
Yeah.
It's just become so frustrating.
And the extra 20 minutes in the hospital is not very nice. Hospitals are not a nice place to be in general, I find. So as someone who has been in a hospital quite often for various reasons, including mostly for births, it's not the nicest place to be. And just that extra 20 minutes and those extra forms just sometimes just makes it not worth it anymore.
Yeah, and it's for everything. Even just going to a GP visit, we then have to make sure we get the receipt back so we can go claim money off of our insurance. And it's just, you're always having to remember all the paperwork afterwards. It's such a pain. I don't like it.
Yeah.
It bugs me.
And so what does that process look like? Obviously, as an Australian citizen, I've never experienced that process, but what does the process of becoming a permanent resident and a citizen look like?
So to become a permanent resident, so there's a few different visas that grant you permanent residency. So basically you have a whole bunch of visas, and some of them have a certain time frame to them, like you can stay in the country for 2 years or something, and then some of them say you can stay indefinitely, and therefore those are permanent residency. And they tend to be harder to get and more expensive than the temporary ones. And most of them have, all of them, I think they've got, it's quite specific pathways. And you can't just be I want to move to Australia, just apply for permanent residency. There's either you have a specific skill, or you're going through you're going to do business investment in the country, or you have family there, but you
it
can't
has to be
just,
direct family. It can't just be family.
Yeah.
It has to be your parents, your children, or your spouse.
Yeah.
So the fact that my aunt is Australian doesn't count.
Yeah.
And we can't use her.
And so, yeah, you have to already kind of analyze all the different pathways there are, find which ones you'd be eligible for, then actually go through that. Then you apply for the visa. Once you get your permanent residency visa, then I can't remember if it's 4 or 5 years. You have to wait until you can apply for citizenship, and that involves a test. I think there's both an English test and a like general knowledge test about Australia and its values and all of that. Yeah, I think that pretty much sums up the process.
Yep.
It's an interesting like process because obviously, you know, they want to make sure that you guys are 100% sure that you want to live here. But then sometimes like all that consideration time has already happened. It's like, well, could we fast track it? Can it be faster, please?
Yeah.
Faster or cheaper? Cheaper would be
cheaper.
nice.
Yeah.
It's expensive.
Yeah, sometimes the amount of money you got to fork out to the government is ridiculous.
Yeah.
I got a speeding fine the other day, and yes, you know, speeding bad. You know, obviously you're going to get a fine, and not, you know, it's going to be expensive. But like, really, you know, $200 is a lot of money.
Yeah.
Or paying for your license. I'm so glad I didn't pay for my license the first time. I haven't had to repay for it yet, but I think the expiry is coming up soon. And it's like $300. I'm like, it's a piece of plastic that says I can drive.
Yeah.
They get you with the subscription model there.
Yep.
You decided that you wanted to become permanent residents or citizens, whatever is going to happen. Where you decided that while you were living in Townsville?
It was always, I think, the end goal. When we moved to Australia, we decided we're going to move to Australia. If we like it, we stay. And then we find a way to permanent residency and citizenship. And if we don't like it, we'll move somewhere else. We always knew we wanted to find the country we want to live in permanently before we had kids. And we both knew we wanted to have kids before we were... Like, we wanted to have our first kid kind of before we were 26. So we'd kind of put a small schedule on ourselves, but it wasn't enforced. Like, if we moved to Australia and hated it, and it took years before we could move somewhere else, we weren't going to force that so that we can have kids somewhere.
Yeah.
But we always knew, like, we knew when we moved to Australia, we had to stay for at least as long as your master's.
Yeah.
But we didn't have to stay longer than that. But if we wanted to stay longer than that, it meant that's where we were going to live permanently.
Yeah.
So I think we've always known, within the first 6 months of moving to Australia, that's it, we're living in Australia now. Now we just need to figure out how to get to that permanent residency visa.
And we had even started to look even before moving if we could kind of already move on a permanent residency even while still living in Europe. Because also, like, for example, for university, you pay different fees whether you're a local student or international student, and therefore it would have been cheaper and you get like better work rights while you're studying when you're a permanent resident and all of that. So we had even looked when initially moving, but it just wasn't doable at the time, and so we ended up moving on a student visa.
We moved on
making
a
the story
different,
short, but we technically moved on a working holiday visa because we wanted to move a few months before the course started. But student visas only start like a month or two before your course starts, and we wanted to move a bit before that, so we had to get a first visa that we converted into a student visa. Now we're on a postgraduate visa from having finished the studies, and so we're looking into converting that into a permanent residency, but it's been a process.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. It's very complicated, and I wish you all the best because obviously, you know, it's a hard and difficult thing. Lots of hoops you have to jump through.
Yeah.
So, like, moving between Melbourne and Townsville, I've had a friend recently move here from Brisbane to Katherine, which is just south of Darwin. Was there any, like, culture shocks with the way, like, you lived in Melbourne as compared to, you know, living in Townsville, which is a relatively rural town?
I think so, because we were living in the suburbs of Melbourne, but people didn't really talk to each other. People were still very closed and cold, closed off, cold. And then we moved, so we actually live in the suburbs of Townsville. We don't live kind of in the centre. And when we moved, we started like immediately trying to find a route to walk the dog so that she has her daily walk every day. And we live right next to a park with a dog park and everything, so that was perfect. And I think it was even on the first day we were walking her, every time we like cross people on the path, they'd say hello and like start up a conversation. And that's not something we had experienced at all in Melbourne. Even though people in Melbourne were a lot nicer than in Brussels, they weren't that kind of super warm and welcoming and like chatting to you on the street. Whereas here, like, we've already made so many friends living here just from people we've met, like, on the street, specifically walking the dog. Like, all of our friends we've met walking the dog, pretty much.
Yeah.
Or because of our child. But people are a lot more open to having just a random conversation with you here. And that was really nice, especially because after 2 years of living in Melbourne, we were starting to feel like it would be nice to have a few like local friends. And it, like, as you were saying, that kind of social circle aspect was slowly starting to become important to us. And so it's been really nice moving here that immediately we started making friends. And within months of living here, we had friends that we trusted to look after the dog when we had to go to the hospital when I was giving birth to our first child. And so it was really nice to immediately have a community here within, a few months of moving. It was really nice.
And what's nice too is that like it's kind of that in-between state where people are nice to each other and you easily make friends, but it's not so small that everyone knows everyone's business and you've got all that like gossiping because everyone knows, oh, in the town this has happened and stuff. So that in-between size, that's kind of nice.
Yeah, it is.
It is quite nice. I do get that when I have this like very weird phobia that like people know too much about me, and like I don't want, like there's the line between, you know, what happens at home and what happens, you know, outside of home, and who I am outside of home as compared to who I am inside of home. And like I feel glad that there is like a point of anonymity where you can just be someone who chats to someone else, and not everyone knows everyone. Whereas, you know, some of the communities I've seen friends and family live in, everyone knows everyone, and it is, you know, there is no boundary from what happens in your home or near your home to what happens in your professional life, and then what happens, you know, out on the street. It's very interesting. Have you done much traveling through Australia then?
Not really. When we picked up the dog, yes.
Yeah, we did a road trip to New South Wales from Melbourne.
Yeah, because we went with a very specific breeder. And so it was a 6-hour road trip?
Yeah, 6-7 hour drive.
So I wasn't really traveling so much as like we drove to the breeders, slept the night, and then drove home the next day. Other than that, we haven't really had much of a chance.
No,
because
not together. You did that
trip
with your mom.
I traveled a lot when I was here with my mom. But since moving together, we haven't. Just because when we were in Melbourne, you were studying.
Yeah.
And then I was pregnant. And then COVID hit. Literally the day the day I left the hospital after giving birth is the day Queensland went into strict lockdown. So there was no traveling. And then we had a baby. And then the baby was like, more able, like now she's more able to do things and travel, but I'm pregnant again. Perfect timing. So we actually, though we've lived here for years, we haven't actually ever gotten a chance to do any traveling, just because there's always been something bigger going on in our lives that takes up time or takes up money, and so we haven't really had a chance yet. But we do want to.
Yeah, and especially we wanted to, like, around now do a bit more like local travel, like explore a few places in the area, but it's also winter, so it's like cooler and like, for example, we know there's a few nice waterfalls around Townsville, and like that'd be nice to go to, but it's the winter, so it's not going to be as nice to bring our toddler to splash around in, because the water's going to be much cooler and all that. So
if, like, where would be on your bucket list to then go and travel in Australia?
I mean, on my personal bucket list, I want to go to Sydney. Not for Sydney, but my aunt lives there, and I haven't seen her in a few years, and I really miss her. So, like, I want to go to Sydney. I don't care about Sydney. I did all the Sydney tourist stuff when I was here with my mom. So, like, you can go to the Sydney Opera House and all that, and I'll just sit with my aunt and drink wine and talk about kids. I think we don't really have a bucket list so much as we just want to see the country. Like, my mom's aunt, her and her husband, they moved out here in the 60s, And
Yeah.
when they retired, they bought an old RV and traveled literally all around Australia for 13 years. And
Yeah.
that's been such an idyllic thing I've grown up hearing. And when I visited her, she showed me all the like old home videos from when they were doing that in the 90s. And I think that's kind of the thing we know we want to do also once like the kids are out of the house and like we're much
Yeah.
older. We want to properly see the entirety of the country. Like it's a massive country, so may as well try and see as much as you can.
Yeah.
But I think immediately, I know we want to go up to Cairns just because
Yeah.
it's not far and it'll be a nice kind of first trip to take with the kids.
Yeah.
Because it is only like a 4-hour drive, 2-hour
Yeah.
drive, something like that.
3 to 4 hours, yeah.
It's a good little spot, Cairns.
Yeah.
Admittedly, it is the end of the highway. I have a couple of friends from Cairns who are living down here in Brisbane at the moment, and one of the things they constantly tell me is because it's the end of the highway, you get people who it's like gets to the end of the line, and so it's like not the nicest neighborhoods. That's why like not a lot of people live there. But then like it's really pretty. Parts of Cairns are really
Yeah.
really nice.
But I mean, I personally don't have a bucket list. I don't know
No.
if you do.
No, not specifically. Yeah, just to me, yeah, mostly like nice bits of nature and the country in general. Yeah, sure. Like I'll do the Sydney Opera House and other like big touristy things, but yeah, just more see the more like raw form of the country.
Yeah.
Cool. Yes. I definitely feel that. Like I've done quite a bit of travel. I'm really lucky. My father works for Qantas, the airline. So I get discounted flights, and my father grew up doing road trips. So one of the things that we do now is a lot of road trips and a lot of camping. But then at the same time, I don't feel like I've properly seen the country. And there are like big swathes of the country that I just want to go and visit properly. I went to Alice Springs during Easter, right in the middle of the Brisbane outbreak, of all things, which required me to quarantine for a little bit. But I went and visited there, and it was the first time, because my dad grew up there, first time I'd been there as like a tourist and exploring it on my own. And it was liberating to be there and just be a tourist and enjoy the fun things. You know, my
Yeah.
brother was living there at the time, so he had spent a lot of time there, but like he and I just went out for rides in the afternoon, and we would go to the pub or like enjoy Will's friends' company, and it was just awesome just to be a tourist. And that's definitely something I want to take advantage of. You know, there are so many spots in Australia. Why travel internationally is sometimes the argument, because there oftentimes is just as beautiful, if not better, here in Australia.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure.
I have a question about Europe. I'm always fascinated by Europe because it's the size of Australia, but somehow packs more culture. Do you find that like Australian culture, i.e. our love of Milo and our fascination with tricking people into the fact that we ride kangaroos to school, do you think that is like, do you think that we're valid in saying that we just don't have a lot of culture?
I think there's a lot of culture here. I'm very like anti-white people being in Australia, which I know is ironic. I'm white in Australia,
Yeah.
but like we've made a big point of learning the name of the First Nations like land
Yeah.
that we're on and that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I find there's so much culture there that white Australians completely ignore.
Yeah.
So I work in the birthing sphere, and I find like white people in Australia, the way they birth is no different to Americans or Europeans, whereas
Yeah.
First Nations have such a huge cultural heritage towards birth, and it's a massive like cultural phenomenon when someone gives birth in one of the mobs here. And there is so much culture, and even within like white Australia, there is a lot of culture there. I think the difference with Europe, as you said, is pretty much most of Australia has, like white Australia has, a very similar culture. Like I haven't noticed much difference between here and Melbourne, yet the same, like the equivalent distance in like Europe is what, Brussels to Barcelona or
Yeah.
something, and there's a huge culture difference when you go
Yeah.
from the equivalent of Brussels to Barcelona. Like there's so much that's changed. Like the language is different, the culture is different, the cuisine is different, and I haven't found that so much here with like white Australia. But again, if you look
Yeah.
at like the First Nation side of it, there's
Yeah.
a lot of culture, and each like mob have their own like culture and stories. And so I think there is an abundance of culture here. I think it's just been erased and pushed down and ignored a lot. So that's my rant on racism gone.
No, it's totally valid. A lot of the work I do at the moment is centered around, you know, making sure people feel included and accepted, and a lot of that is making sure that, you know, you're very wary on making you're being appropriate to the Aboriginal people in the area. And something that I've realised has not been common enough is like acknowledgement of country at the start. So a big part of our national reconciliation plan is making sure we acknowledge the grounds on top of that we meet on in places like that. So, for example, I'm on Turrbal and Yagara people land here, and every time I do something at the university, that is the first thing that happens is like, hello and welcome and acknowledgement of country.
Yeah.
Or I host a radio show. And so when I host the radio show, the intro to the radio show goes and then acknowledgement of country. And it is something that we never miss. But then like at school, that didn't happen. And I'm like, well, why isn't this like? And you're right. The Aboriginal people have a very strong culture and very varied culture, depending on what tribes you interact with. Wow, I never thought I would have to say this in the podcast, but my father actually has an Aboriginal name because he was born and raised in an Aboriginal mission. It's a Catholic Aboriginal mission out in Santa Teresa. And so he has this amazing relationship with Aboriginal culture there. And, you know, when he goes back to where he was born, people still recognize him and people know who he is, even though he hasn't been there for like the last 20 years. I don't think people realize how important that is and how important it is because they mastered that. Here comes my racism rant. I went to the National Youth Science Forum, which is this great science education outreach thing for people going into Year 12 who are considering careers in STEM. And one of the big focuses there was using Aboriginal science or Torres Strait Islander science for issues we're facing here in Australia. Things like adapting to the climate and looking after the environment. And, you know, the reason why burn-offs are so important here in Australia is because they regulate the environment a little bit more. And we forgot about that. We forgot about that for so long. And, like, there is a lot of things that science has begun to learn about from Aboriginal science, and people forget that. And people forget that, you know, we are a European country, and so we don't have summer, winter, autumn, spring. We have wet seasons and dry seasons. And so, you know, it's not yes, it's colder statistically now than it was 6 months ago for me. But that's, you know, that's not the important part of the weather. The important part of the weather is whether it is wet or dry, because that's what's going to affect the environment more than the temperature. And it really frustrates me to see that ignorance as well, because, you know, as an Australian, we should be proud of the history before us whites were here, because that history and that culture is arguably more rich than and more engaging than the culture we have currently, especially in white Australia.
And that's a big thing, because I say, moving here as Europeans, knowing we were going to have children here who were obviously going to be born white, it was a big decision of like, how are we going to face this as European parents to children who we want to be aware of Australia's history. And like, a big thing for us is we don't celebrate Australia Day so much as use it as like a way to remind ourselves of Australia's history and now to teach our children. Our daughter, she's 15 months and she's got multiple books about Australian history and Aborigine culture. And we make a big point of teaching her, like, you don't own this land. You were born here and you were privileged enough to be allowed to be born here. This is not your country. And even if you become an Australian citizen, this is still never going to be your country. And it's a big thing for us as parents. And even just looking at, like at daycare, they did like paintings with the Aborigine flag colours. And I was really happy that that's as far as they went with it, because a lot of like schools and daycares do like, oh, let's do traditional Aborigine paintings where they do dot paintings, but you aren't allowed or meant to do dot paintings without having been taught and given permission by an elder of the mob you're on. And so like, that's a big thing with like, we're looking slowly at what schools we want to send her to. And so I'm looking at that side of things of like, do these schools teach kids proper history, or do they teach them the whitewashed happy version of the history? And I think it was a huge decision when we decided to have kids. How do we face being Europeans in a country that is not ours? And I think also for me, on a personal note, it hits hard because I'm of Scottish ancestry. Like my mom's Scottish, my grandparents are Scottish, and my family is very much of the opinion, and I agree with this, that we were colonized. I mean, we were colonized by the English, and we are still being held as a colony. And so it's something that I've grown up with a lot, about like learning about like my true history of my culture, and like understanding that like the English just kind of took over and did their own thing, and that's what happened in Australia too. So like I want to make sure my daughter and all my kids can grow up knowing that just because they live here doesn't mean they get to do whatever they want on the land, and like they have to be respectful.
It's something that I think people continue to forget, is that the culture that precedes you is just as important as the culture that you have now. And, you know, most of the time, no land in which you set foot on is yours. The land that you set foot on has belonged to other people, and you've got to respect that. And you know, but then also at the same time, you know, in a counterbalance is, you know, we've got to respect the past, but then we've also got to look to the future and how we can, you know, I'm a big proponent for we need to acknowledge the past and learn about the Aboriginal culture and that, but then also continue to adapt it to our Australian culture, to make our one, like not one Australian culture, but like a more whole Australian culture that isn't so broken by British colonialism, and things like, you know, just a whole, like, I really feel that I really want Australia Day to be a day that we celebrate our multiculturalism and celebrate what has brought us to this moment. But, you know, it becomes a day that we have to acknowledge the fact that people have been hurt. You know, we've come so far. Like, I'm looking at the news in Canada at the moment, and those terrible grave sites that they're having there. And I just go, we've come so far, and yet it's still not enough. And there's still so much more important work that we have to do to fully acknowledge and respect the harm that we did as, well, no, our ancestors did as white people. It's an interesting thing, especially for you guys who, you know, weren't born here in Australia. You know, for the first 12 to 15 years of my life, I grew up with that privilege because I wasn't aware of it, and so I had to reteach myself.
I think that came quite naturally to us, just to bring it back from like moving from Europe to Australia, because so we were both born and raised pretty much, I'd say, in Belgium. And Belgium has a really dark history with colonialism and like the Congo. And when like our parents' generation was in school, that wasn't taught. But when we were in school, we were taught about the Congo and what happened. And, you know, there would be school field trips to go to the like buildings that King Leopold II built using his private money from his private colony, the Congo. And so we learned from a very young age to be aware and to acknowledge, like, hey, my country's history is actually really dark and twisted and horrible. And not that long ago, the person in charge of my country did horrible things to thousands of people. And so I think because we grew up already learning how to be able to look back on our history and to accept that, like, we're not great people. Like, as a country, and we have done really bad things, I think helped when we moved to Australia to keep that mindset going.
Look, I think Europe has got it right in teaching, well, at least Belgium, if that's the way it's taught. In all of Europe, I would love that. I don't think it is. But, like, acknowledging the fact that terrible things were done and from a young age as well, and going, these things were done. We have to acknowledge, we have to be aware of the fact that these things were done, and we've got to keep that in mind, which is...
Yeah.
I think it also helped that we learned Australian history from outside Australia, and therefore there was, I think, a bit more objectivity to it. I think it's still not to the point where there was as full of an acknowledgement as there should have been of what happened, but at least there wasn't any direct influence by government or whatever people in Australia that might have agendas to hide that kind of thing, and therefore growing up with a view of Australian history that wasn't taught in Australia helped, I think, to have that view of things.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, you're so right there, because the Australian curriculum, like, does history teaching in Australia is not great to start with, but then, like, having to try to teach this incredibly complex history in such little time, I think the Australian curriculum really struggles to teach it well. And you've got to keep an eye out and be constantly vigilant and correct errors and look for ways that you can teach the full Australian history from that unbiased standpoint that you guys have come from, which I think is very important, especially, and you've definitely made me think, because, I was planning on, it'd be great to live internationally, at least for a year or two, and I'm definitely going to have to, before I make a decision to move somewhere, to really look into the culture and respect that culture and that history as well.
I think it was really important when we decided, because we knew we had decided to move, and it took about 2 years before we actually left Belgium, and so we had 2 years to learn about the culture and the history as adults also, and not just learn about it through school. And I think that was really useful, and it is something I would recommend to anyone moving internationally, whether permanently moving or just I want to live in a place for 6 months or whatever, to look up where you're going. Also, just to make sure that you can actually properly communicate and integrate with the community. Like, if you move to, like, take Belgium, for example, and you assume that everybody in Belgium will speak French, and you end up in the Flemish side of Belgium, you're going to have pushback and you're going to have issues, and the community won't accept you and you won't integrate as well. And so I think just be aware of where you're going to and what that entails, culturally speaking, is really important.
And that is also something else that, like, it's not something that is just something that happens in Belgium. I think it happens all over the world. You go to certain parts of an area and you're going to get different cultures and you'll be accepted differently for who you are and your views on things. And to be prepared. I think that's very interesting. Well, we're sort of heading towards the wrap up. Is there anything else that I haven't touched on that you guys want to talk about?
I think a big question we often get when we say, we moved from Europe to Australia, is people say, wasn't that scary? Wasn't that stressful? What gave you the guts to do it? And honestly, I think the reason we weren't so stressed and we weren't so scared is we didn't allow ourselves to think of the consequences.
Yeah.
And the plan was, okay, so we need to have the house packed by this date so that the boxes can get on the container ship, and then they're gone, and then we need to leave. And we just had all our dates in mind, and then that was it. We didn't think too much about, like, what if we don't like it? What if something goes wrong? What if, like, I think we just ignored all the negative aspects that could happen, and that helped us deal with a lot. Because now looking back, I have no idea how we did that move.
Yeah.
Like, oftentimes we'll look back and, like, what possessed us to move from Belgium to Australia? Like, what happened? What were we thinking? How did we even accomplish that? There was so much that could have gone wrong. And I think the key for us was just don't think of anything that can go wrong. Because otherwise you're never going to make that kind of a move. And so I think that's kind of, that's what I always say to people, is we just ignored all the negative, what could go wrong, and focused on what could go right.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I think that is sometimes a very important thing to do, is just block it out and go, I'm just not going to think about the negatives now. I'm just going to keep pushing forward. And like, when you moved to Australia, have you been back to Belgium a couple of times to visit, or not at all?
The plan was to go last Christmas, but then COVID happened, and then we thought, it's okay, we'll probably go next Christmas, so this Christmas, and then I'm due early November, so even if the borders were to open, we are not going back this Christmas because I'm not traveling with a baby. And we've had family plan to come out and visit multiple times, and every time COVID has come in the way. But no, we haven't had a chance to go back to Europe. We're really starting to feel homesick for family and friends, not for the country. I'm not interested in going back to Belgium for Belgium, but we are starting to kind of miss specifically like family members, like parents and stuff, and then our closest friends. Because like I've got a friend that I've been friends with since we were 3 years old. She's my closest friend, and I haven't seen her since we moved. So we do want to get back as soon as we can, and that makes sense for our family, because I am not traveling with a like 8-week-old. That I am not doing a 22-hour flight with a baby.
Yeah, does not sound like a good idea. My mother went to London for a wedding, like 2004, 2005, and at the time my little brother was 6 months old. So she left a 6-month-old with my father, and it was the baby number 4. And went to London for like 4 or 5 weeks, and then came back, and it was just this crazy. And mum talks about it now, and she goes, "I would have never have done that with a child that young. Left them alone without taking them, or." But like, it was a completely different time. But yeah, I definitely feel that traveling with a newborn is terrible sometimes. We were lucky. We had some natural gaps between some of my siblings that have allowed us to go on trips, like going out to Canada about 10 years ago, or like there was a period of time where there was I went to Japan with my parents for a week, and like that's really great, and I really enjoyed it. But yes, it's very hard to schedule that with a baby. Baby's very inconvenient.
Yeah, and not just with a baby, but like. Your mum's a teacher and my stepmom's a teacher, so like we would only visit on school holidays in Europe so that we can actually see our family, because what is the point in traveling 22 hours on a plane if everyone's at work? So like we're trying to, which is why Christmas last year made so much sense. Our daughter was about 9 months old, all our family would be off work, and then COVID. So it's it's scheduling
that's
nightmare
terrible.
At this point.
Yeah, look, I have plans to go and travel internationally sometime next year, but I can't like confirm anything or like book anything, and it's terrible because I really want to go and see people and see more parts of the world that I haven't seen before, but I just can't make a commitment yet.
Yeah,
and it's a little depressing, to be honest. Anyway. So the last question I have for you guys is, do you guys have any plugs?
Well, I have a podcast, and we have a podcast together.
Oh, yeah.
So my podcast is RSVPod, and I interview couples or individuals on commitment stories. So like whether they got married or not, and like just their relationship stories in general. And then do you want to do the plug for our podcast?
Yeah, our podcast together is called Typically Diverse, and it's about the reality of living, because I have ADHD while you don't, so it's kind of like that, the way our brains work differently, and the reality of all of that.
Yep.
Yeah, wow. And so has there anything that you've been viewing or watching or listening to that you want to plug?
I've suddenly blanked on what media I am watching or interacting with at all.
I feel that. I really
so like the Twitter account, Dinosaur. I think the @ name is dinosaur_J, and it's like short comics about like little dinosaurs, about like, and they address like depression, anxiety, mental health, self-worth, and all of that, and
They're very cute.
they're
The
very
little
cute,
drawings are
and
very
it
cute.
often has like it's either has like nice positive messages or it's very relatable, like mental health struggles and all of that. So that's something I've been enjoying a lot lately.
Yes, little comics like that, I always find it, especially the ones that are very newspaper-esque, I really enjoy.
I'm trying to think of what content but
Dino Man _J.
there you go.
That's the Twitter account.
I don't know.
I don't know.
No. I spend way too much time on Facebook groups about birth. But I doubt that's
Look.
for everybody.
What an absolute mood. That is definitely something that I see and I go, you know what? I've been down the rabbit hole of like Facebook community groups and all the gossip that's been going on there. I'll do my plugs really quickly. I'm Sam. If you haven't already heard before, you can find me on this podcast. Also, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. So on Instagram and TikTok, I'm at sam.the.journalist. And on Twitter, I'm samob_journalist. And I am going to plug Hank Green and his TikTok account because I really enjoy it. It just lots of questions asked and he answers all of them. And I want more people like Hank Green on the internet answering questions and stirring up a little bit of internet controversy every now and then, which I think is always great. But yes, I've been really enjoying his content. It's been really great to just watch the silly fun every now and then.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Ben and Brienne, for being on the podcast.
Thank you
Thank
for
you for having
having
us.
us.
Thank you for listening to Content and Capable. You can follow the podcast socials at Content, the letter N, Capable on Instagram and Twitter. You can send a super boring email to us through contentandcapablepod@gmail.com. The art was done by Opia. You can follow them on Opia_art on Instagram. Opia is spelled OPIA. Feel free to message them about making art for your project. Our music was written, recorded, and edited by Nora Strauss-Reeds. You can find Nora at Kane_I, that's I as in the body part, on Instagram and Twitter. Feel free to message her about making music for your project or editing your podcast. I'm proud to be a part of the Movie Night Crew Network, which features the Restricted section, a chapter-by-chapter Harry Potter pod with lots of spoilers all the time. The Movie Night Crew join some friends as they react to some terrible, some meh, and some really great movies. Fandom's Gone Wrong, a show that discusses all things fandoms. Of the Eldest Gods, a chapter-by-chapter Rick Riordan pod full of myths and legends. And My Cabbages, an Avatar podcast that follows the true hero of Avatar The Last Airbender, the Cabbage Cart Guy.
Coffee, tea, honor, cabbage. Long ago, the four elements lived in harmony. Then, shit went totally cray when the Avatar attacked. Only the Cabbage Man, merchant of fine cruciferous vegetables, could stand against his trolling. But when the world needed some dank veg, he vanished. 10 years have passed, and my partner and I have started a new podcast.
My Cabbages! An Avatar podcast.
A weekly show about Avatar The Last Airbender. Whether it's Sokka's new line of cologne,
Hey, look at you, sitting there on a seal. Well, now look back at me. I'm on an even bigger seal. Now look away.
D&D related antics,
You have to make an acrobatics check for that. And Aang just like unzips his pants and whips out his D20s. He's just like, I got this.
or randomly breaking into song.
Go bending waterfall.
We'll stumble our way through the greatest show ever made, one episode at a time.
You can reach us at CabbageCast, which is our Twitter, or
Subscribe wherever you catch pod.
Rotten cabbages? What kind of slum do you think this is?
Content and Capable is a podcast all about answering the question, how do you adult? Don't forget to rate and review it on your favourite podcatcher, and I will see you next Monday for another episode.
That movie sucked.
I kind of liked it.
Movie Night Crew Network.